Krishna. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, and welcome to today's session. How are you doing? I pray that all is well with you and your families at this time. So when we look at the way certain people are able to handle difficult situations in life, we always look upon them with great admiration, that they're able to be composed, that they're able to attain a certain state of being that empowers them, that makes them seem almost invincible or completely immune to the effects of material nature. And this is something that everyone can admire and appreciate. So what is that consciousness that empowers one to be in such a state? Well, in today's verse, Krishna is describing that state, and he's describing to Arjuna that this is the divine consciousness, that when one is reposed on the transcendental platform from the level of the soul, the result of that is a state of divine consciousness, a state of being that is achieved by being connected on the spiritual platform, and the external result of that is that one is indifferent to the effects of the material nature.
The Lord taught Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna because Arjuna was a devotee of the Lord, a direct student, and his intimate friend. Therefore, a person with qualities similar to Arjuna's is best qualified to understand the Gita. That is to say, one must be a devotee in a direct relationship with the Lord. Arjuna was in a relationship with the Lord as friend. Of course, there is a gulf of difference between this friendship and the friendship found in the material world. This is transcendental friendship, which cannot be had by everyone. Bhagavad Gita should be taken up in a spirit of devotion.
So let's take a look at this. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse number 53. Shruti vipratipanate yadastasyati nischala samadhavachala buddhis tada yogam avapsyasi. Translation: when your mind is no longer disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas, and when it remains fixed in the trance of self-realization, then you will have attained the divine consciousness. So it's an amazing state of being that Krishna is describing to Arjuna here, and that we're hearing today, that when a person is connected on such a deep level of themselves, there's a certain immunity that comes upon them like a shield, which protects them psychologically from the onslaught on the effects of the material nature. And this is what we all are hankering for, right? It's a state of being where one becomes indifferent to whatever is happening outside, whereas inside one is connected on the spiritual transcendental platform. So how does one attain that divine state of being? So Krishna is describing here that the first thing, do not become disturbed by the flowery allurements of the Vedas. This is the first level of the yoga ladder. But we see, as Krishna is teaching Arjuna, that there's higher levels to be understood and experienced. And this level of the sensual experience is just the first level. It's the first connection that the Vedas make to the material world. So naturally it's going to be from the sensual level. But as we've been discussing, that there are two symptoms of this. One, it's temporary, and secondly, it's binding. So once we've understood that the binding nature gets us more entrapped here, we're okay with the temporary one. But the binding aspect of it is what is most difficult. Therefore, Krishna has been advising Arjuna that don't be allured by this, Arjuna. You are looking at the temporary result and thinking that this is what the purpose of spirituality is. No, one should raise oneself higher. And as he's encouraging Arjuna in this, he's telling him that your mind is disturbed because it's being connected to this level of spirituality. And this sensual level of spirituality never satisfies you. Why? Because you'll always be hankering and lamenting. Enough is never enough, and you'll be lamenting that it's finished so quickly. So again, the time factor is acting on this principle. So Krishna is saying, connect yourself to a dimension of yourself which is not under the influence of time. And then when you experience life at that level, that is a divine consciousness. That is a state of being where one is actually connected at the divine spiritual level of who he is to the transcendental realm. And that process was being described as Krishna consciousness, or the process of yoga that connects one in love, bhakti yoga. So he describes in the purport here, to say that one is in samadhi is to say that one has fully realized Krishna consciousness. That is, one in full samadhi has realized Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagavan. So we've been describing these three features of the same spiritual dimension. That the spiritual level first has a formless feature. I think we discussed this when we were discussing the Upanishad and chapter 12 of Bhagavad Gita, verses 1 to 5. That Krishna is saying, yes, this exists, yes, this is okay, but it's more difficult. The formless, impersonal aspect of God is more difficult to relate to than the form aspect. When you have the form, it's not material form. Remember, it's a spiritual dimension. So how can it be material form? It's a spiritual form, like a spiritual hologram. And that formless energy as a person was described as Vasudeva or Krishna.
We should not think ourselves equal to Krishna, nor should we think that Krishna is an ordinary person or even a very great person. Lord Sri Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So according to the statements of Bhagavad Gita, or the statements of Arjuna, who is trying to understand Bhagavad Gita, we should at least theoretically accept Sri Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and with that submissive spirit, we can understand Bhagavad Gita.
So the same feature, according to realization, will be experienced differently. As one realizes himself and the spiritual platform, then the first feature will be this formless feature. One will start to experience and feel the spiritual energy. And energy is formless. And gradually, as one does that through the yoga system, then the yogi comes to understand the super soul in the heart, the localized feature of this absolute truth. And as one deepens one's realization at that level, then that connection to that form is the process of love, of bhakti yoga or Krishna consciousness. So you can see the gradual development of these three phases of the same absolute reality.
In this world, human beings are not meant for quarreling like cats and dogs. Human beings must be intelligent to realize the importance of human life and refuse to act like ordinary animals. A human being should realize the aim of life. This direction is given in all Vedic literature, and the essence is given in Bhagavad Gita. Vedic literature is meant for human beings, not for other forms of life. Out of so many human beings who are suffering, there are a few who are actually inquiring about their position as to what they are, why they are put into this awkward position, and so on. Unless a person is awakened to questioning his suffering, unless he realizes that he doesn't want suffering but rather wants to make a solution to all suffering, then he is not to be considered a perfect human being. Humanity begins when this sort of inquiry is awakened in one's mind. Every activity of the human being is to be considered a failure unless he inquires about the nature of the Absolute.
So he goes on here. The highest perfection of self-realization is to understand that one is eternally the servitor of Krishna, and that one's only business is to discharge one's duties in Krishna consciousness. So once you understand the nature of the absolute reality, that it has a spiritual form, then naturally by connection with that, you'll want to serve. And that process we've been discussing is called devotional service. or the process of connecting to the spiritual platform with love. So once one is established in that process, then he's living at the material level, but he's existing on the spiritual level. If one observes such a person in that state, then his experience of the world will just be like everyone else. But the way he handles himself at that level is very different. Why is he able to do that? Because he's connected from the spiritual platform. He's not connected from the bodily level. His connection, his energy flow, his energy source is coming from the spiritual platform in his eternal relationship with the Supreme. And because that process is being developed and manifesting, then on an external level to us, we are observing a divine being, a person who's in divine consciousness. But all that is done is connected himself on the spiritual level. So just see how amazing the state of mind or state of being is. So he goes on, a Krishna conscious person or unflinching devotee of the Lord should not be disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas, nor be engaged in fruitive activities for promotion to the heavenly kingdom. So we discussed this because he's come to understand by Buddhi Yoga that the resultant or the results of this action is twofold. One, it is temporary, and secondly, it is binding. So he's come to use his intelligence to understand, no, if I act in this way, I'll have a lower experience of life. How do I have a higher experience of life? I do that by connecting my consciousness to the spiritual platform. Therefore, he develops divine consciousness, as we're hearing about in today's verse. So he goes on, in Krishna consciousness, one comes directly into communion with Krishna, and thus all directions from Krishna may be understood in that transcendental state. So you see the state that he's in now, he's directly in communion with God. That's an amazing state of being. That means at any time he can connect because he's always in that state and he keeps himself in that state. We were discussing this, how one keeps oneself in a certain state. So by the design of his life and his activities as a lifestyle, he's designed his life in such a way that he's always keeping a divine consciousness by acting in the process of Krishna consciousness. Therefore, he's in direct communion with the Supreme Lord. He goes on, one is sure to achieve results by such activities and attain conclusive knowledge. Yes, this is a very interesting point. By the current study of knowledge, knowledge is always increasing. That we have a certain limit or understanding of it, and gradually as people discover and learn more, then we increase our database of knowledge. The internet becomes bigger. But by the nature of this consciousness, one is already in contact with the Supreme Consciousness, and that consciousness is not under time. Therefore, one can access conclusive knowledge at all levels of reality. Wow, that is an amazing, powerful state of being. And how do we attain that? I'm sure we all would want that. How do we attain that level of being, that level of existence, that level of consciousness, of conclusive knowledge? Well, let's see what he says. He describes here, one has only to carry out the orders of Krishna or his representative, the spiritual master.
So we have to simply take instruction from Guru, and if we execute that to our heart and soul, that is success. That is practical. I have no personal qualification, but I simply try to satisfy my Guru. That's all. My Guru Maharaj asked me that if you get some money, you print books. So, there was a private meeting talking, some of my important God brothers also there, it was in Radha Kunda. So, Guru Maharaj was speaking to me that since we have got this Bhagavad marble temple, there has been so many dissensions. And everyone is thinking, we'll occupy this room or that room, that room. I wish therefore to sell this temple and the marble and print some book. Yes. So I took up this from his mouth, that he is very fond of books. And he told me personally that if you get some money, print books. Therefore I am stressing on this point. Where is book? Where is book? Where is book? So kindly help me. This is my request. Print as many books in as many languages and distribute throughout the whole world. Then Krishna consciousness movement will automatically increase.
This is how it's done, by aligning our consciousness to that of the spiritual master in service. When one is connected to that mentor, that spiritual person that has achieved that state of being connected on the spiritual platform, then when one takes guidance from such a person, then one can perfect one's own life and develop one's own strength, own experience from the level of the soul. Wow, what an amazing state of being to be on.